It says there, speaking of those who are living and reigning with Christ during this 1,000 years, it says there that they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Now we know this is what Christ, as we said before, this was what Christ was telling his disciples, his apostles, that they would be seated on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel, okay, in the regeneration, which is when Christ ascended on his throne. So that began in the year 31. So that means, again, as we discovered, the 1,000 years began in the year 31 when the Spirit was poured out and when the saints began reigning, when Christ began reigning. So you have these Christians living and reigning. But then it says, the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. So these people who lived and reigned with Christ, they were of the first resurrection. Now, unless you have watched my study on the first resurrection, this might seem very strange. But I have a study on the first, well, not just the first resurrection, but what did Christ teach about resurrection? Okay? And you need to go and watch that study if you are going to really understand fully. Though I'm going to explain in part, but in detail, you need to watch the study if you want to have the detailed version. But anyway, so let's come back to this, okay? So Jesus said, the Revelation said, the first resurrection was in the 1,000 years, and those who lived and reigned with Christ during that 1,000 years, those were those of the first resurrection. And then it says in verse 6, blessed and holy is he that has a part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. Okay? But they shall be priests of God and of Christ and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So again, those who were in the first resurrection were those who were reigning the 1,000 years. So what is this first resurrection? Again, I told you, for the full understanding, go watch the study. But for a brief summary of the 1,000 years, first of all, as I said here, as we read here, the 1,000 years began, the first resurrection began during the 1,000 years. Now, what is the first resurrection? The first resurrection was the reconnection of man to God via the Spirit. Okay? Let me repeat that. The first resurrection was the reconnection of man with God, or to God, man with God, via the Spirit of God. This was made possible when Christ ascended to heaven and began reigning in the regeneration. In fact, let's look at John chapter 14, verse 20, just to see this is what was the teaching of Christ. Okay? So let's look at John chapter 14, verse 20. And we'll read from 20 to 22. He's speaking from 20 to 23, sorry. Here Christ is speaking to his disciples, and we know in John chapter 14, he says, I go to prepare, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come again, receive you unto myself. That's what he was telling his disciples. Now his disciple, he continued to say in verse 20, at that day you shall know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. So here we have a reconnection. We have a reconnection of God and man via Christ. Okay? Christ was the one who made this possible, so that man could be reconnected with the Father. Good? So Christ was in the Father, and then the disciples now would be in Christ. So once they are in Christ, they too would be in the Father. Okay? And then Christ would be in them as well. Okay, so we have here a spiritual temple concept again. Okay, but anyway, I'm just trying to stick to the the topic here without going off with other information. If you want the other information, I say watch the study, the other study with what did Jesus and the apostles really teach about resurrection. Anyway, so Christ said now, any individual, and he's speaking specifically here now of the remnant, he that has my commandments and keeps them, he it is that loves me. And he that loves me shall be loved of my Father, and I will love him and will manifest myself to him. Individual person here. Okay? So Christ is saying that the person, and he was speaking to his disciples, so this would happen in their time. He's saying the person who loved him, any one of you who love me, my Father will love you, and I, Jesus Christ, will manifest myself to you. So here we have a personal coming of Christ in the Spirit to such a person or persons. Okay? Now, so the other Judas asked this question. Judas said to him, not Iscariot, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world? Because Judas was thinking, okay, well, Christ is going to come back in a visible way. Okay? He did not understand Christ was coming back as the Comforter, the Spirit, right? So Jesus said now, Jesus answered and said to him, if a man love me, he will keep my words, my Father will love him. And now what? We will come to him. Well, you know the Father is Spirit. So if Christ and the Father is coming, then Christ has to be Spirit also. Right? So he's talking about a spiritual coming. He says, we will come to that individual and what now? Make our stay with him. Okay? So Christ was talking now about not a physical, visible, audible, and all of these other things that we were told coming. He was talking about a coming to bring the individual into a relationship, the oneness relationship with him and his Father, making us houses of God, right? In my Father's house. We're making us houses of God, temples of God, and so on, right? That oneness relationship, right? If you want to read more about this, if you want to learn more about this, there's another study I have on my channel, full studies playlist. It is entitled, What Was the Place That Jesus Went to Prepare? If I remember, I'll put it on the link on the top of the screen here. If I don't, you know where to find that study.